Now, an individual, a committee of politicians, and the question, do you love this country? It sounds like Senator Joe McCarthy and his Un-American Activities Committee. It wasn't, though. It was the chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, the never-knowingly understated Labour MP Keith Vaz, having a go at the editor of The Guardian for publishing the data stolen by the rogue intelligence contractor Edward Snowden. The editor replied that his newspaper certainly loved the country and was trying to defend its democratic values. It wasn't only Mr. Vaz who was asking him challenging questions. Here's a flavour of the exchanges.
Some of the criticisms against you in The Guardian have been very, very personal. You and I were both born outside this country, but I love this country. Do you love this country?
How do you answer that kind of question?
We live in a democracy. Most of the people working on this story are British people who have families in this country who love this country. I'm slightly surprised to be asked the question, but yes, we are patriots, and one of the things we are patriotic about is the nature of the democracy and the nature of a free press and the fact that one can, in this country, discuss and report these things already.
It isn't only about what you've published, it's about what you've communicated. That is what amounts or can amount to a criminal offence. You have caused the communication of secret documents. We classify things as secret and top secret in this country for a reason. Not to hide them from The Guardian, but to hide them from those who are out to harm us. But you've communicated those documents.
Is that a question?
If you'd known about the Enigma code during World War II, would you have transmitted that information to the Nazis?
That is a well-worn red herring, if you don't mind me saying so, Mr. Ellis.
Well, we invited the chairman of that committee and the man who asked Mr. Rusbridger if he loves his country to tell us why he'd asked the question. At first he said yes, but then he changed his mind and decided he couldn't make it after all. We are, however, joined by two other members of the committee, the Liberal Democrat Julian Huppert and the Conservative Mark Reckless. What did you think when that question was asked?
I was somewhat surprised by it because I don't think it really gets to the heart of the issue. There's a huge issue about the surveillance that was happening, and it's amazing that while there's debate in Germany, debate in the US, around most of the world, here there's this focus on what did The Guardian do. It's a very odd question, very odd approach.
What did you think when the question was asked?
I don't agree with The Guardian in much of what it writes, but I wouldn't question their patriotism.
So why do you think the question was asked?
I don't know. I thought it was certainly interesting. Prompted a lot of coverage.
What did you think? Could you see why it was asked? I mean, was anyone going to answer, no, I don't love my country?
I think it was an odd question, but then it was quite an odd session. I mean, there is this real obsession with what exactly happened. I mean, we had discussion about whether The Guardian broke the FedEx terms and conditions, which is not the key issue in any of this. And I think it's a shame. What I'm looking forward to is we're going to have the head of MI5, Andrew Parker, coming to give evidence to our committee. That will be interesting, because the real questions are what can MI5 do? What difference will this make? How can they actually do their job properly without invading everyone's privacy?
A lot of people from a foreign country would have found it rather strange that here you were hauling in a newspaper editor instead of asking why on earth the intelligence agencies were up to what they were clearly up to.
Well, The Guardian's asked those questions, and I'm not calling into question the editorial judgment it's made, but what I'm concerned about is how it's treated the information, whether it's applied the appropriate security, and in particular, that it seems to have communicated that information about members of intelligence services overseas in at least, it appears, 3 different circumstances. And I just wonder if that's put potentially our agents, employees of the services, into danger, and whether The Guardian really needed to transfer to communicate all that information overseas in the way that it did.
Do you think an offence has been committed?
I think it may well have been, because the offence
and if so, should there be a prosecution?
Well, I think the offence has been committed in terms of the communication of the data about members of the intelligence services, and I think it could be useful to people who might be concerned in terrorism. The question is whether The Guardian was justified in doing that, and whether there'd be a public interest in prosecution. That's a matter for the CPS. But the issue was what the Guardian published in the public interest, but was the way it treated the information in the public interest, and in particular transferring over 50,000 files to the New York Times, this information with David Miranda on his games console that went from Germany to Heathrow and wanted to take it on to Rio, and then there's other information that was FedEx. Why was the Guardian doing all that with details of members of the intelligence services?
It does seem, I mean, it seems that there's clearly been an offence committed under the Terrorism Act.
So I don't think it does, because actually the section that was referred to in the session actually has a specific clause, 58.3, which says that it's not an offence if there was a reasonable excuse. And I think breaking an internationally important news story would definitely count as a reasonable excuse in anybody's definition. I think the Guardian's been very careful. The real problem is actually the NSA had all of this information, 58,000 files containing names and all sorts of other information, and yet a contractor with very little seniority was able to get hold of it and take it away. There were 850,000 people with access to it. I think the real problem is how the NSA lost so much data, because any of the other 850,000 people could have taken that information and sent it directly to people who would do us harm. I think focusing on how the Guardian dealt with the information is missing the key point. The key point is that we now know far more about what was happening in our name, and this is something which really needs to be discussed. What are the rules? We benefit massively from surveillance. GCHQ, MI5, MI6 do a great job. What are the limits? What is okay to do? What's not okay to do? Parliament needs to determine this, rather than this incredibly overbroad legislation we currently have.
It's amazing that 850,000 people had access to this information.
And I'm not sure what that exact number is, or how much that information was available, or how easily to those people. But I am concerned that the information has been sent to a number of different countries, a number of different organisations by the Guardian, and that the security of that information may not be what it needs to be. And in particular, that foreign countries and their intelligence services may now have access to who our agents are in a way that they didn't before. And I think that is an issue. And I think the Guardian should assist the security services by making clear what information was transferred and who those individuals were, so if necessary they can be protected. But I think that's one point. But I do agree with Julian that it raises issues about the intelligence services, how there's oversight of that, and I think it would be important in Parliament to elect, at least perhaps subject to vetting, but to elect the chairman and members of that intelligence committee who oversee these matters, so we can be sure that actually the way they're looking at intelligence, and Julian and I may disagree about this, and I might lean more to allowing the security services to keep us safe by overseeing this information and trying to see if there's suspicious patterns in it, but I believe that Parliament should decide and monitor what are the appropriate limits.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.